Hi, everybody, and welcome to this ADAA webinar. My name is Deborah Kissin, Dr. Deborah Kissin from Light on Anxiety in Chicago, and I'm the co-chair of the Public Education Committee for ADAA. That's the Anxiety Depression Association of America. And welcome to our webinar, Helping Your Perfectionistic Child, which I'm super excited to not only host, but also to learn a lot about as the parent of 1 out of 3 of my kids highly perfectionistic. So you can't always blame the parents because sometimes it's just biology. So I'm looking forward, as well as I'm sure you guys are, for learning lots of great information. And our presenters today are Dr. Lynn Seekland and Dr. Deborah Ledley. Dr. Seekland is a psychologist. Oh, I'm going to go forward so you can see. Oh, that's me. Hi, everybody. And this is ADAA. And don't I have you guys in there? Oh, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but that's okay. Since this is on perfectionism and we're going to tolerate this, Dr. Seekland is a psychologist at the Children's Center for OCD and Anxiety in Pennsylvania. She's been specializing in treating anxiety in children and adolescents for over 20 years. Dr. Seekland enjoys assisting parents and teens through the transition into young adulthood, maintaining connections and closeness while encouraging and building autonomy and competence. Dr. Seekland conducts training workshops for professionals and parents, as well as offering consultations to professionals, and she's fabulous. And this is Dr. Deborah Ledley, and Dr. Ledley is a clinical psychologist in Philadelphia, also specializing in anxiety disorders. Dr. Ledley has published over 50 scientific papers and book chapters, as well as 4 academic books. Her book, Making Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Work, wow, that sounds like a great book I'm going to buy, is a bestseller in the field of clinical psychology and is used as a textbook in many clinical psychology training programs in the US and Canada. Dr. Ledley is the author of Becoming a Calm Mom, How to Manage Stress and Enjoy Your First Year of Motherhood. And she's the co-author of the Worry Workbook for Kids, helping children to overcome anxiety, fear, and the fear of uncertainty. Wow, those are great resources. So let me tell you a little bit more about ADAA, who is the wonderful host of this webinar, as I flip around. So ADAA is a leading nonprofit in the field of anxiety and depression. Our mission is to improve diagnosis and promote the prevention and treatment and cure of anxiety and depression and stress-related disorders through education like this wonderful webinar, and also through practice and research. And we work to end stigma and to get the word out that these conditions are real, serious, and very important to know, treatable. I want to invite you to the ADA website, and it's a fabulous resource. If you just go to ada.org, you'll find a great list of treatment providers if you go to the Find a Therapist section of the homepage. And if you are looking, maybe you're somewhere where there isn't a local provider, many of the therapists do offer web-based treatment, so know that's a treatment option. And there are also free peer-to-peer online support groups, and feel free to make any charitable donations to ADAA through the website, and that way we could offer more of these wonderful programs, such as the one on perfectionism today. So we are going to get started, and I'm going to hand this off to our wonderful presenters. If my computer would. Okay. All right, well, I see you guys, so.
We're ready to go.
Great, thank you, Deborah.
Introduce yourself.
And I'm Deborah Ledley.
And I'm Lynn Seekland.
And we are going to be talking about how to help your perfectionistic child today. We have some fun cartoons in here. This is a good one to start us off today. So our plan for the day is to talk about what perfectionism is. We hear a lot of people just tossing around, I'm such a perfectionist, or I wish I was more of a perfectionist. We're going to talk about problematic perfectionism today, when perfectionism gets in the way, what it looks like, how to talk to kids and teens about perfectionism, so how parents can engage their kids in these discussions, discussing the pros and cons of perfectionism, and also how families can experiment with a different approach, try things out in a different way, and live their lives differently. Another fun cartoon, the Hall of Fame, those who have never made a mistake, and as you can see. So an overview of perfectionism. There's so many definitions of perfectionism, but I really like this one from David Burns. Perfectionists are people whose standards are high beyond reach or reason, and who strain compulsively and unremittingly toward impossible goals, and who measure their own worth entirely in terms of productivity and accomplishment. And I really think that idea of an impossible goal is important here. We're not talking about just trying hard or getting good grades. We're talking about setting goals that really nobody could reach. So we all know that having high standards is helpful, but perfectionism that we see in clinical practice is associated with such high standards that they actually get in the way of performance. And perfectionism is really associated with anxiety and depression. And I love this quote from Julie Lithcott-Hames, sorry, Julie. It's a fabulous book that every parent must read. I feel like it's an essential parenting textbook. Allowing freedom within limits to try and fail and get better is the only way children, or really anyone, will ever learn how to do things for themselves. Perfectionism is not only the enemy of the good, it is the enemy of adulthood.
And we love this book. And Julie was the head of freshmen at Stanford University for many, many years. And so she saw many perfectionists trying to make it at Stanford, being a perfectionist and falling apart and not being able to meet their goals that led her to think about this and write this book, which we love. And really parents love it.
Yeah, really this idea that you have to have had the experience of failing or not doing well at something to get through life.
And way before college.
Way before college, yeah. We talk about that in our practices all the time. So just getting back to what perfectionism is not a mental health disorder. Perfectionism is more of a personality style. It's a way that people approach the world. We see perfectionism across different disorders. We see it in generalized anxiety disorder, in OCD, in eating disorders, in depression, in social anxiety. So we see it throughout the mental disorders, and we actually also see it just in people who don't have a psychiatric disorder at all, but just have this personality style that's really causing them problems.
How early do you think for parents that they might start seeing signs of perfectionism in their children?
We see preschoolers.
Preschoolers, absolutely. Kids who in preschool are tearing up their drawings or avoiding doing art or worksheets, and
if they can't do it just right. Yeah. So
got it.
Yeah, I remember one of my daughter's friends' moms asking me, and I think it was the pre-K classroom at our daycare, what to do about this, because her daughter always was tearing up her pictures because they weren't perfect, her handwriting because it wasn't perfect, and also she was taking lots of time to get ready in the morning because she couldn't get her tights on just so, and couldn't get her braids done just so. She wanted her to be perfect.
Yeah, I think that could be an assessment tool. Little girls and perfect braids or perfect buns for ballerinas. That could be the
for sure
one screening tool. Yeah.
And we'll talk maybe a little bit later, but perfectionism can have this OCD quality of having to get things just right, but it also can be that high standards even in the youngest kids about having to be good at something without necessarily having to get the braids exactly right.
Yeah. So interesting. My daughter just showed me the handwriting of this girl. They're now in the 8th grade, and her handwriting is the most perfect thing I've ever seen in my life. It looks like a font on a computer. So I don't know if they've had a great deal of success in working on that.
Okay.
So for anyone who has visited the ADAA website, you have probably read about cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is a therapy that tackles people's beliefs and has them try out different behaviors and see what the outcome is. Cognitive behavioral approaches have been shown to reduce perfectionism, reduce anxiety and depression symptoms, and reduce eating disorder symptoms. And researchers have used cognitive behavioral therapy to work on perfectionism in individual therapy, group therapy, in guided self-help using published books, and also in web-based treatment. So it really seems that CBT is a great way to address perfectionism across all sorts of different modalities. Unfortunately, we don't know much about treating perfectionism in young people yet, but certainly we'd have every reason to believe that CBT should be as effective as it is in adults, and maybe even more effective because the patterns aren't as set as they are in grown-ups. So what does a perfectionist look like? In our office, when we're seeing kids who are perfectionists, what are we seeing, and what are parents seeing? Parents are saying, my child does well at everything. My child does well at school, at sports, at piano, at ballet, at anything that they try. Other parents dream of having a child like this child. You never have to remind him or her to do her homework or practice the piano. Wow, fantastic. But at the same time, my child is too hard on herself. I wish she could just be a kid. My child is wound like a spring. My child never looks like he's just having fun. And my child freaks out about the littlest things, like a grade on a small quiz or a night where there's slightly more homework than usual. Sometimes, and equally importantly, my child has such potential but never gets anything done. My child is so smart but can't start a project. We often see kids who can't choose a topic for a paper or which project they want to tackle. So maybe the teacher says, pick an inventor, and a kid just can't pick. I mean, there's so many inventors. How do I pick who's the perfect inventor? What would I get the best grade on? You know, they just can't even choose the topic to even start the project. My child is always handing in their work late. The teachers don't even know how bright my kid is because they never see any work. The kid doesn't turn in their work. And my child won't share in the classroom or won't turn in homework or assignments unless they're 100% confident in the product.
Right, and there's smaller versions of that of kids not presenting their viewpoint, answering a question, unless they're sure they can be totally right.
Yeah. So we do see a lot of perfectionists who procrastinate. It's very fascinating to watch. Often in the later teen years, we see perfectionists kind of crash and burn. They want to do their work. They want to do well in school. They want to go to college and succeed. But the fear is so intense that the work will take a long time, because it often does. So why even start? If I'm going to have to take 6 hours to do homework tonight, I don't even want to start it. I won't be able to get the work just so, and it's so stressful to try to get it just so. I'm just not even going to go there. And kids end up getting so upset and not feeling that they can cope that they just avoid the bad feelings. They may put it off and do it later or not do it at all. And if they put it off and do it later, they're doing it so late at night that they don't have the resources anymore to concentrate or to deal with their emotion dysregulation that comes along with all of this.
And if we have parents listening, you know this because your child comes in or you hear them banging around at 12 o'clock, starting their work from 12 to 3.
Yeah.
Can I ask you ladies a question? So you said earlier sometimes this overlaps and has OCD-like qualities. I'm trying to imagine a time where it doesn't have OCD-like just right qualities.
I think a lot when the kids just want to get that A+, that it's not so much the way that they do the work, they just need to get the A+, and a 98 isn't good enough, and a 97 isn't good enough. It has to be the 100 every single time, or it is the end of the world. And we have kids at a very young age have a goal in mind. I had a kid who, like in the 5th grade, wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon, and she believed that to be a pediatric neurosurgeon, you had to get an A+ in every test, every quiz, every homework that you ever took, or that wasn't going to happen. And so,
yeah, the same thing. You don't see OCD-like behaviors, but we have people who are athletes and they're worrying about their performance before, they're beating themselves up after. They don't do any OCD compulsions or rituals. They just have the standards, and then they're disappointed, wrecked by not meeting them. That can happen also socially. Like I have to actually say the right thing or have the perfect response or be funny all the time. So those kids don't show compulsion-like behaviors. but they have incredibly high standards and feel like they're missing them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other interesting comment for parents is that a lot of parents know about all of this because you're up all night with your kids.
Yeah.
And we've certainly had parents who are themselves getting very, very sleep deprived because they're staying up with their kids, either encouraging them to do the work, sitting with them as they do the work, or helping them through the emotional meltdown that happens at 1 or 2 in the morning when it's just too hard to,
or fighting for them to go to bed.
Fighting for them to go to bed, absolutely. So the way I always like to think about these kids, Lynn and I joke that, not really joke because it's sad, but we joke that they're girls who are sitting in the waiting room who look like Alice in Wonderland. They look beautiful, and they, if they have a school uniform, it's perfect, or their clothes are perfect, everything's perfect. But as soon as you start talking to them, there's this fragility lurking just under the surface. It almost feels like if you touch them, they're going to crumble. And I kind of put together this slide because I was really thinking about a kid who could draw a drawing like that, but there's so much angst under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So people ask us all the time, right? Where does this come from? Why are kids so stressed? Why are these kids perfectionists? What's happening to our kids these days? And I think the important thing to realize is that it's coming from so many different places, and it's not what people assume, which is people always blame the parents.
Blame the parents, yeah.
And more often than not, we see parents saying, where did this kid come from?
Right. Like, please get a B. I'll give you a reward if you get a B this week. So I think parents feel really guilty that it's really not my fault, and it's, of course we know that there are a lot of other factors involved. So
yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So we see kids who are affected by their schools, by peers, by parents, and by the culture. To differing degrees, kids feed back into that, affecting their schools, peers, parents, and culture. And schools are affected. It's just this big push and pull. And I think there's a lot of conflict here. So we have the kids in the center here. I'm going to put my reading glasses on for a second because my eyes are imperfect these days. Parents have a lot of conflict within themselves. We all want our kids to succeed and do their best and succeed in life, get into a good college, get a good job, make money, all that good stuff. We also want our kids to be happy. And those desires conflict. There's a lot of cultural expectations to go to college. We have these assumptions that the better college equals a better outcome in life. We can talk about that later. I would dispute that. Peers put a lot of pressure on kids. My personal take is that where I see the most pressure is from within peer groups, that birds of a feather tend to flock together, and that there's a norm within the peer group to get super high grades and to have very high expectations for which level of class you're going to get into and for which college you're going to get into, and SAT scores and all that sort of stuff. And the kids are competitive within themselves, even if they're not admitting it.
But they also like to compare how stressed they are by these things.
Yes, absolutely. And then schools have a real conflict where they want their kids to get good test scores, high graduation rates, and get into prestigious colleges. But then they also want to have mentally healthy kids. Schools don't want to have kids who are needing to take leaves of absences, kids who are at the nurse all the time. And certainly we've had schools in our area that have had some suicides in the past few years, and everyone immediately goes to all of this. Too much pressure on the kids. They make this assumption. Again, probably not the whole story. So schools as a source of stress, just to buzz through these in a bit more detail. Pride in schools can come across as unreasonable expectations. So when schools say, we send this many kids a year to Ivy League schools, or we do so much better than this other school down the road in college admissions, that can cause a lot of stress on the kids who attend the schools. Kids also are publicly praised, or our patients would say publicly humiliated, for getting the highest grade, for writing the best essay. The kids we see hate being singled out for good grades or for performing well. And I wish teachers would stop doing it and maybe sometimes commend a kid who made the best effort or who overcame a struggle. There's also a real cult of the A going on, and I think it's different from when we were kids. When I was a kid, most kids were average students, and then there were the really smart kids who got all A's. It now seems to be this belief that all kids can get A's in everything. I don't know where this came from. I certainly didn't get A's in everything, and I tell my patients and my kids this all the time. But this also drives a lot of pressure. If you're supposed to be really, really good at English and good at physics and good at music and good at gym, get A's in all of them, that's really a very tough nut to crack.
Right, or the same thing of expecting kids to be honors or AP in every subject. There's not a human being that's supposed to be AP and honors in math and English and history, and chemistry. And yet there's the expectation that if you're smart, you should be doing all the hardest classes.
You should. Yeah, one of those shoulds. And then I think there's this general message given to kids in school to work harder, to study harder, to spend more time on schoolwork. And this is a really dangerous message for our perfectionistic kids. We like to tell our kids, your job is different. Your job is different from the other kids, and your job might actually be to work less.
Right.
And to spend less, and to spend less time on school. So
and then it might be harder for you that's going to be harder work for you to practice that good enough muscle. Going for the perfect that's your natural default, but this is your hard work is actually getting a little below that. So
absolutely. A couple more things about schools. There's a lot of homework in the young grades. Kids are losing out on time to just be creative and learn through doing. I was just talking about this last night with my family. This opportunity to retake tests until you get an A makes kids think that the only acceptable grade is an A. Mm-hmm. And I had a patient yesterday who couldn't believe when she got to college that the grade you got on a test was your grade. She just didn't go to a final in one of her classes, and the professor wouldn't let her do anything about it. And then in other classes, she couldn't retake things until she got an A, and she was shocked. Mm-hmm. So I think we never give kids the opportunity to just sit with the feeling of doing hard work and maybe not getting the perfect grade. We're never training our kids to sit with this and be okay with it.
I have a real quick story. I have a recent perfectionist girl who's about 12 in the practice who always overworks and does too much. And she had her teacher, her history teacher, who she thought was the most challenging and most difficult teacher. And he has sometimes offered this chance to take the exams again. But she went in to meet with him, and he told her very clearly, I know who you are and how smart you are. I don't give a damn about how you do on any of my courses, and I can give you the option because I won't take it away from you, but I'd like you to choose not to take this again. And she was very proud of herself for first time ever making the choice to be okay with the 85. And I wrote back to this teacher with appreciation and affection, and he actually tells the kids, I don't care about the grades in my quizzes. I want you to love history. So he was walking the walk. So
it's great.
Yeah.
It's great. And I love that about loving history. What we want kids to do is start learning about what their interests and passions are. And if all we're doing is studying to the A and taking the courses that look good to get into college,
or they're good at,
or spending months studying for the SATs and ACTs and retaking, kids are going to lose touch with things that they care about. And maybe, like the wonderful book by Dean Julie, kids get to college and they don't know themselves.
Can I ask you guys, it seems a little bit like there's a cultural shift, at least infiltrating the curriculum, where my kids go to school around good challenges and learning to get things wrong and practicing not knowing. And so it's certainly, I'm hearing more of it, and I think it's somewhat impacting the curriculum. I'm wondering if you're seeing that in Philadelphia, and overall if maybe we're catching on to some of this.
We see individual schools
Yeah.
trying very hard to create.
I think a little bit, though. I think it's almost like talking out of both sides of their mouth.
Right.
Because I think that in the younger grades, they are starting to do this of habits of mind and, you know, really teaching kids how their
Growth
brains
mindset.
grow.
And growth mindset, right. Yes.
And then they're still also hearing
Right.
about studying harder, working harder, taking tests over and over again, and starting in.
So that kind of goes back to your prior slide of that conflict of wanting to do that, but also wanting to have kids set up for success. So,
yeah. So peers as a source of stress. We had mentioned birds of a feather flock together. We've noticed so many interesting things about peers these days. A lot of secretiveness around success, not telling friends where you've applied to college, not revealing feelings of stress, anxiety, and depression to friends for fear of showing weakness, only sharing grades if they're good, and then otherwise pulling the I don't remember card or changing the subject if grades are bad, and saying something was easy when other kids struggled with it. This is really hard with perfectionists. If you're unhappy and start crying and melting down in school when you got a 98 and other kids are struggling to get a 75, this is going to be a problem in your peer group, and people are going to start having some resentment toward you. And we talk very frankly to kids about this. You know, how do you think this makes your friends feel when you're having your freak out about your 98? And I also talk a lot to kids about changing the tone within their friend group, about sharing what all this stress is like. And wouldn't that feel better if you all knew what each other were going through instead of competing all the time?
Yeah, we've also had teenagers especially wish and like to make a rule in their friend group that they actually don't discuss their grades, but they don't feel like they can be the person to do that. We have asked our teens to think about asking one other friend, how about we propose to our group that we don't compare grades? And they feel a ton better when they don't, but it feels like not okay to be able to do that or ask for that or say, you know, it makes you feel bad.
Yeah. So. I'm wondering if you guys ever see it backfire, because I just had a teen client the other day where they kind of made that pact with each other. Let's not talk about the college process. We don't want it to get too competitive or stressful. But then there's also kind of this isolation and going through something that is so big in your life and yet not turning to your friends, the support that you normally get about anything important, and kind of going at it alone, and how hard that is. So it was good to not be talking about it, but then at the same time, they kind of, that wall went up that I think a little bit too much, so that they were.
That's a rigid distinction, right? That you could make more subtly about how you'd want to help each other and how other things would make it stressful.
Right.
You know, certain ways of talking about college would be stressful and not helpful, but we would really love to say to each other, it's so hard to wait. Like I have my hopes up for this one. I don't know how I'm going to deal with the disappointment. You'd hope that friends would talk about that. What Deb, I think, is suggesting is that friends talk about the difficulties along with the accomplishments. And if it's focused on one and not the other, then you're the odd one out for struggling.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So how about parents? What are parents doing here? Should we blame the parents? Much of the time, the pressure comes from the child or the teen themselves.
That's supposed to be as a typo, rather than
the parents
and not for pressuring. All right, yeah.
Now, clearly, there are some parents who are very focused, who are focused on status, achievement, and athletic performance, who push their kids to achieve and do the best in school and play on the travel team and yell at them to make mistakes. We just don't see those parents very much. We really mostly see parents who are not promoting this and wish their kid would get a bad grade or be satisfied with less. So these are the parents who often are saying, where did this kid come from? I'm not really concerned with what other people think. I don't really hold terribly high standard for my kids. With these parents, we need to help you, the parents, be able to empathize with your kid, even if you don't really understand what this feels like. Maybe you weren't like this as a kid, or you're not like this as an adult, but to kind of understand the pressure that they feel, because it's very difficult. Am I doing your slides?
That's all right.
Oh my gosh.
I was just switching.
I was having so much fun. I just kept going. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, we'll just do it together.
No, go ahead.
And then, of course, we're gonna talk about subtle messages that even the parents who say they're not perfectionistic end up saying and doing that might be helpful to catch. We do have a number of families that come into our practice, though, who say, I know where he gets it from, right? I'm just like that. I'm perfectionistic at work. I'm perfectionistic in my friendships, or I've been like this always, or I've been like this as an adult, or I started in college. They might need to recognize the patterns of modeling some of this behavior at home. But we think that a lot of the families we see are really just somewhere in between, like I really wish they would just calm down and relax and have fun and get a B, or those who are perfectionistic, that there may be subtle beliefs and ways of interacting that parents might not be aware of. So one example that we give in our training workshops that I think if you're a parent listening, you'd understand is, we'll say one of our treatment goals when we're helping your child is we're going to ask them to raise their hand in class and actually give the wrong answer on purpose. And the liberal, I want my kids to get B parents turn white when we say this. And they almost say, I don't think I could do that. And that makes me nervous that you're going to ask me to have my child not complete their homework and send it in not done or incomplete. So it may be that we like one message, but we understand the fear that comes with taking these risks that we're going to ask kids to take. And we're going to model for parents how they could do it even outside of therapy, begin to model taking different kind of risks to find out what happens. We have had some parents who are dealing with a lot of anxiety themselves, who actually have a different kind of fear. They don't want to let their children or teens have a difficulty or fail because they feel that maybe their child would become undone if they failed, right? Or become really depressed. Or they themselves as parents have catastrophic predictions of the future if they don't take a time off from school, or they don't take that high level course. And we often find, again, this is more in therapy rather than people working on things themselves, is we would want to take some time as a therapist to really just understand that parent's own experiences, their own values, their own beliefs, their family of origin, so that they can be clearer about what they want to model for their own children. And we might do a similar pro and con analysis of their approach that we're going to show you later that we do with the kids and teens, about the benefits and disadvantages of modeling these beliefs about perfectionism. And we really would love families, and maybe we'll just ask everyone listening here, it's important to note the impact of perfectionism on your family and on your relationship with your child. And even if your perfectionistic child does not want to change anything, the family has a right to change how they're living for themselves. And a lot of times kids or teens won't share things that they are good or bad at because of the perfectionism. They have trouble asking for help, or they don't want to try new things as a family, that the family would like to do on a Saturday, or we have to go to an activity that I'm good at. So these things can impact families indirectly. So we're going to cover hopefully most of this today. We're going to see what time we have, but the general goal of helping a perfectionistic kid or teen is we want to help get the conversation going. We're going to talk a bit about that because these are sometimes difficult kids to talk about these important values and pressures with. It's not so easy. We want to help identify problematic beliefs and behaviors that are showing up as a result of the perfectionism. And Deb described about cognitive behavioral therapy. We feel like we can give people some coping, some information, some knowledge, but what really changes things is the practice of trying things differently, facing fears, and taking risks. And you could talk for 3 years and not make a change unless the kid and teen can see that I can survive taking a risk and it's going to be okay. And so it's really important. We're going to tell parents to actually make things happen that your kids and teens will not want to make happen, because it will be worth it. So we're going to try things out differently, see what happens, and let's make some ways that families are living up to their values and how they want to be in the world, and the kind of kids they want to raise in the world.
Question for you guys. And for parents that are viewing this, it might be a question that they have. How many of these perfectionistic kids and teens do you guys see in your practice that are coming willingly, that they're starting to realize it's not working for them? And how much of it is starting with the parents coming, realizing it's not working for the kids, but the kids aren't on board yet, and maybe they get started with the work on the family change level if the kids aren't quite ready to realize the costs?
The majority is that it's either, Deb and I have laughed and we've said in our workshops, if you're a successful perfectionist, you probably don't seek treatment, right? If it's working for you without loss of sleep, loss of fun, anxiety, and depression, your parents aren't going to bring you, and you're not going to bring yourself, right?
Right.
So we have quite a number.
People know that they're suffering. The kids know that it's hard to be them, and they're feeling it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We find that majority, it's hard to be them. We have had more of, I think, the younger, where the parents are kind of saying the tyranny of the perfectionism for our family, and the kid doesn't.
Perfectionist. I like that.
Right, and the kid doesn't want to change. I've had a few where the parents had to insist on changes that the kid did not want, but that's not our norm. Yeah. Most of them are pretty stressed, upset, tired, right? Not doing what they want to do, and they're upset about it. The kids, the teens themselves. So we want to kind of really be open to asking kids about perfectionism without trying to teach a lesson. And I think that's the problem. I'm a parent and I don't do it that well when I'm in my parent mode, but we want to be curious and interested rather than try and change them. And with perfectionists, I think we found we have to be extra careful to listen longer before trying to change anything, so that they can have a chance to say what matters. So we just want to ask them, what do you expect of yourself in school and activities? How do you feel when you fall short, or how do you think you would feel, or what would happen if you fell short, like you got that B? Are these standards higher than what other kids expect, or do you think it's about the same? Where do you think your standards came from? And it's fascinating. A lot of kids say, I don't know, or just because, or you're supposed to do well. They have there's no internal reason for the striving. There are kids that there is that, but it's just like, especially the younger kids, you're just supposed to. And it's very sad because it's then driven by the wrong things. And then we talked, and this is for the parents too, is just maybe to stop back and ask yourself, let's talk about my kid's schedule and my schedule. What's it like for my day, my week? Do we have time for leisure time between school and activities?
No.
We have a lot of kids
with you guys.
Yes, who think leisure time is forbidden for them. We have or not okay. Just lying on your bed staring at the ceiling or listening to music, not okay for some of these kids. Are you able to pursue your true hobbies and interests, or are you limited by what you feel you should be doing? I have a 15-year-old in my practice who's a perfectionist who loves to read and write for herself. And that's our goal, is to have some time most nights of the week where she has time to write for herself and to read a book she loves, but she can't fit that in a lot of the time. Do you feel like you're missing out on family things because of your perfectionism? And let's talk a little bit about goals for the future. Well, I want to get forward to so you can see how kids
push back on the term perfectionism, as somebody feels like, no, I'm not perfect enough, that I'm not good enough to own the term perfectionism? Or do people normally get that, that's me being...
We actually use perfectionism. If they don't like it, we change it. But they don't have a problem with it for the most part, the kids and teens we see.
Okay.
And then we do ask the kids separately, what do you think about your parents' own standards for themselves? Do you see them approach, work and home in a perfectionist way? Do you compare yourself to siblings? That's another big one, right? If you have a highly successful sibling, and you're struggling academically or you're not as good, how does that feel?
I think also the flip side, sometimes having a sibling who's a learning disability,
right,
or who struggles, or then you're the sibling that has to be perfect.
Right. And we also ask, again, the teenagers a little bit, are your parents a little bit hypocritical, right? They say one thing and do another. So what Deb and I have found by a lot of trial and error is that we really are wanting to focus on the reasons and the pros that the kids see about being a perfectionist, because there's a lot of them, right? So we want to investigate fully and write down the good sides of being a perfectionist. Check what feedback they get and make sure they know it's okay to like it. So a lot of these kids are known as being the smart one. They're the go-to kid, right? They're the one that the teacher pairs to help another kid. And many of them also fear that if they're not pushing themselves, it means they don't care, or they're going to be average or lackadaisical. And that's a real fear. I'm going to show you this coming up a few times. And then we're going to ask, secondly, the cons. You know, just really straightforwardly, how is this strategy really working for you and how is it not? How does this pushing yourself stress you out or get in the way of things you like? You know, how do you want your life to be if you had more choice? And we really ask, what would tomorrow afternoon or this weekend be like if you were orchestrating how you wanted to spend your time and where you wanted to put your energy? And if you were not working all the time, what would you do with the time you had? And even envisioning this is really helpful. So most of the pros come from praise, right? Because you get it from friends, from teachers, from parents. They like never getting in trouble and never getting nagged to do stuff. Many of them say inherently, which is no problem at all, I feel good when I get a good grade or I do well in an activity. You know, it feels like it's worth it. And being known, you know, it feels good as the smartest or the best. The cons vary from kid to kid, but I always need to keep up or improve my last performance because people expect that of me. I'm not allowed to mess up. You know, a slip is terribly upsetting, you know, or painful for me. I feel like I have no choice. It takes over my time for fun, relaxing, wasting time hanging with friends. Every assignment, this is really amazing to us when we're working with the teens especially, every assignment for them feels like a test of their self-worth and their intelligence rather than a stupid essay. Yeah, we just say a lot of work is busy work, right? And it's just a paper, but they imbue each assignment with a measure of their value. And then how would you start a paper, you know, or how would you write if that's what you were trying to, you know, come up with? And sleep and tired all the time. So I'm just going to show you, these are two of my clients, actually, a 17-year-old with generalized anxiety. This is someone who actually had been a valedictorian in his class, top level, and then had to drop out of school for a month because he was unable to produce. But his pros were being smart and unique. Very important for a lot of these kids is to be unique. I got recognized for my smartness by teachers and peers. My whole identity has been as valedictorian, right? That's what he was known for. He really liked feedback from his teachers about doing well. And he got a very healthy, specific satisfaction in work done well. He says, I feel emotionally complete when I write a good essay, when I've thought about something. So these are very true pros. But his cons were spending too much time on things, concerned about, lose motivation. I'll become apathetic and one of the herd. Being average is it's almost like it's like the worst thing you can have, right? For some of these kids. I'm physically wrecked, emotionally drained, and it's hard every day to meet expectations. So this was his definition of his pros and cons. Here's a contrast, a 12-year-old boy who has nonverbal learning issues as well. For him, pros, it makes me feel good to get a good grade. People say you do good. It keeps me from being lazy. It's this real fear that I'm going to actually be like a slacker, we say. If I'm not a perfectionist, the only other option is slacker. And teachers like me more. But this was a boy who actually was having major meltdowns in his classroom. So the cons were he would freak out, and people don't say, I'm good now. And my teacher's mad at me a lot of the time because he was acting out because of his distress, kind of crying, stopping, quit, I can't do this, in his classroom. So his pros moved into his cons. And the thing we like to talk about just clearly with teens is perfectionism is supposed to help you do better, but it often backfires instead. And here's the realistic, without judgment way we want teens and kids to think about how it's working and how it's not working. If you're too upset to do your work and you care about your work, it's not working, right? If you procrastinate because the workload is so overwhelming, it's not working, right? If you can't turn in work you've done, we have kids who've done work and won't turn it in even though it's complete because they don't feel good enough about it, then it's not working, right? You can't even turn in the work you have. Teens will say they'll start a paper over and over again or switch topics so many times that they end up with a bad second draft rather than a good paper. So their goal is to write a really good paper, but they end up with a not good paper because of the perfectionism. A lot of times work, if it's a more OCD kind of compulsion, if you have to correct, write and erase and put things, your work can look messy when your goal is to make it look nice. You can't feel proud. This is, again, younger kids and older kids, proud of my drawing, proud of my story. If you're a perfectionist, you never get the proud. Like, that was good. I like what I came up with. And for a lot of athletes, this is our way into. They play more poorly than their goal is to be a really good athlete, but their perfectionism and their self-criticism is taking them out of the game, and their coaches are noticing that they're not playing, they're not jumping in, they're beating themselves up, they're not like learning new skills. So that's another way their perfectionism is backfiring instead of working. And this is where I think we find that this is where we can engage the adolescents and the teens and the kids to think about doing something different because it's not working. I think for time, we'll go forward. Yeah, we'll go forward a little bit. It can keep you actually on guard, or looking for trouble and anxious a lot of the time, which is the other thing we say about why worry is not working. So I think the biggest thing that we're going to do in the time going forward, and we'll maybe rush through these a little bit more, is to say we really want kids and teens to tell, or young adults, tell the difference between drive, motivation, and aiming to do my best work. We want them to have all that, and we don't want to change any of that, right? But it's different than have tos and shoulds, because there's not a choice aspect, and there's not a value-driven aspect for what you're doing. You just have to, right? So we want them to know there's a way out, that you don't have to compromise your goals and dreams to get there, but we need to build in more time, joy to your life, relief, choice, and flexibility. It's scary, but worth it. But you're going to have to prove it to yourself. I'm not going to be able to convince you of this. And here's how we're going to do that.
One metaphor that we like to use, I'll sometimes take my hair elastic out of my hair and say, with perfectionism, we're stretched to the limits. And kids really worry that if they give up their standards, they're a slacker. Lynn mentioned that already, this black and white. I'm either perfect or I'm a slacker. There's nothing in between. And what we want is that we want to find this middle ground. We still want to have high standards, and we still want to accomplish our goals. We want to have a life. And that's what we're really aiming for. And that's the hook for kids. Like, what are you missing that you want to be doing? Do you want to watch a TV show at night? Do you want to watch the Phillies game with your dad at night? Do you want to go out with your friends on the weekend? Great. That's what we're aiming for. So, although we can try to convince kids to change, as we've mentioned lots of times, they will really only internalize it if they work on changing their own behavior and see that the consequences aren't dire. And the good thing that, because we've done this for so long, is we can say to kids, I've done this with a lot of kids, and so far, nothing terrible has happened. So I've had kids not study for tests, or study half-time for tests, or go to school without their work done, or done all these exposures and behavioral experiments. So far, all the kids are still here, and they're all still meeting their goals. And the good part of this is they reclaim their time and enjoyment, and that sustains itself. So some examples of experiments that we do with kids, and parents can do these at home with their kids if they've set this model out first and the kids understand why we're doing this. So not just parents saying, you can't do your homework tonight.
Right.
There has to be some model and understanding for why we're doing this. So setting a time limit for homework. In the lower grades, 10 minutes per grade per night is a good limit. So if you're in the 4th grade, you shouldn't be spending more than 40 minutes. Setting a time limit for studying. If you have a quiz and it's out of 5, you should not be spending hours studying for this quiz. Maybe you don't even want to study at all. Leaving one item on homework undone and seeing what happens. Is the teacher going to freak? Are you going to get an F? Are you going to get kicked out of school? Or is the teacher going to say, can you fill that in? I don't know. I mean, some teachers might freak, but that gets into a whole nother issue of coping. Can you cope? Can you learn to cope with that? Purposefully making a mistake on homework. Purposefully handing in messy homework. Taking a night off. Shocking, but true. Doing a leisure time experiment and seeing what the consequence is. And this one, taking a test with no studying at all, we're careful with this one. We're not going to have a kid in 11th grade not study for a final. This is a really good exposure to do with those quizzes that are out of 5. The little vocab quizzes you do every week, or the little math pre-tests, or the little, the little things, especially in the lower grades that count for absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. What will happen if you take a test and don't study at all? And I've had kids who get the same grade. A lot of kids, actually. A lot of kids get the same grade as when they were studying for hours. And it's like a radical experience. Mm-hmm. In a way, sad, because kids say, oh my gosh, I've been wasting so much time. But we just flip that around and say, well, we don't have to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. How often do you encourage parents to coordinate with the school, with their teachers, and maybe depending on the grade and the situation?
Yeah, we sometimes really choose to enlist the teacher, because if the teacher says to that student, I only want you to spend 20 to 30 minutes on this assignment, it means much more than the parent. So if we're having trouble having the kid believe that would be the goal of the teacher, we would really love to have the teacher. We don't always have to, and it depends on the case, how much that stuff is happening mostly at home, or mostly at school. But I've had some just kind of miracle shifts from kids. If I've just asked the teacher, I've called the teacher and said, could 5 minutes at the end of the school day, could you just tell this kid that the message that Deb was saying about working harder, doing more is not for you. Right. I recognize and see you as a committed, conscientious student, and I want you to only spend 30 minutes on my homework. It can be huge, but not always necessary.
Right. And harder in the upper grades where kids have lots of teachers. It's easier in the lower grades where there's one teacher. I also think what ends up happening just naturalistically is because these kids are such good students. I'm not talking about the procrastinators who don't hand in their work, but the kids who are always handing in this beautiful work. Nothing happens to them when they hand in their work a day late, or they leave a question undone, and so naturalistically the experiment is turning out the way that we want it to.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part. We do say to the kids, and kids younger and older, you have established a reputation already with your teacher. It's different than if you never do your homework. So it's okay to leave it blank and say, I tried and I couldn't make it work. Yeah. Right? Or I forgot, because they're not going to have a big deal about you. Yeah. Whereas the kid who comes in every day forgetting their homework, they're going to be mad at them. Right. But it's a different story.
So another fun idea is that parents can do at home. If kids erase and rewrite to make their words and numbers just so, you can practice doing your work or doing some art without an eraser or a pen. Kids who can't start on a writing assignment, what topic is best? What if I change my mind? Take 5 minutes to brainstorm ideas, cut the ideas into little pieces, pick one out of a hat. That's your topic. Kids who overstudy for tests, take a test without studying at all. Kids who reread in order to understand perfectly, it's really helpful to just take a cue card and cover the passage as you read. so that your eyes can't drift up and reread, and then have your parent quiz you to see if you understood what you read without going back and checking. And you can just do that with a fun book as well. And kids who spend too much time on homework, setting a time limit. And for some kids who have a really, really hard time, parents with their kids' cooperation, obviously, can pack up the backpack and actually put it in the car at the end of the evening, so that the kids aren't getting out of bed and doing more work after bedtime.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to parents to think about. If that kid is sitting there, younger or older, and the homework is sitting next to them, and they're trying to go on to a different topic, they're not going to be able to probably do that if they're a perfectionist. Yeah. And even if it doesn't go to the car, it goes down to downstairs, right after that subject is done, because it's just too hard to sit there, tolerating thinking I should do more.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And for anyone who's viewing this webinar, any adults who are relating to this material, these are perfectly valid exercises to do with yourself. So maybe blocking out a couple of words in a book that you're reading, and you could kind of have a read along with your kids where they're missing out on some information. You are too. They could quiz you and see that even with 10% of the information gone, you're still getting the overall gist of things. So everyone can have fun with it.
Yeah, and I think too, if you're a parent who's a perfectionist, to be open with your kids, and to, maybe you're sitting when your kid's doing your homework, doing some emails from work, and saying, I'm going to try something too. I'm going to send all my work emails without rereading and checking. And, sitting with that discomfort with your kid and working through it together, I think it's very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. This is just a list you can read. These are for kids who fear acting imperfectly, who fear embarrassing themselves, maybe more in the social anxiety camp. These are some fun things kids and adults can try to see what happens. What happens if you have a button open on your shirt, or you by accident call your teacher mom, which I think all kids do from time to time, or you're saying the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning and you say it really loud or say a word wrong. And see what happens. Does anyone notice? Does anyone really care that much? And the great thing about kids is that, like, 20 minutes later, they're onto some new funny thing du jour, and nobody really thinks that hard about it. So the key really with all of these things is that we want kids to make a prediction before they do the experiment. What do you think will happen? Be very specific. If I don't study for this vocabulary quiz, I am going to get 0 out of 5. Be specific, write it down. And then after the experiment, assess what actually happened. Did your feared consequence actually come to pass? Or was it not as bad as you expected? And the more you can use a number or specific prediction, the easier this is to disprove our faulty beliefs.
Oh, yeah, I think the thing that even if you're not an anxious parent, asking your kids to try some of this stuff, especially if they don't want to do it, or maybe when you actually think about it, it's harder than you think to do. We ask parents to honestly and compassionately ask themselves, if you do feel nervous, why do I feel nervous or uncomfortable if? Why do I feel nervous or uncomfortable if my child doesn't finish an assignment? Why is it hard for me to not contact my teacher to explain that they overslept or they didn't finish that assignment? Can I tolerate that my child is not invited, or has a child be mean to him or her? Why is that hard for me? Because in many ways that's life, right? Is to not get invited to every party that happens, or kids are mean sometimes, and we do need to build strength and tolerance of that if it's not bullying, right? And why is it hard for me to let my child struggle or experience rejection and failure? Because you want to have compassion for yourself that it's really hard, but also, if possible, create the pause between the automatic reaction of calling that teacher ahead of time, or say she shouldn't have done that, she was so mean, when your child tells their story about being mean. And I run a support kind of sharing of information support group for some parent groups I do. And a lot of, parents are really honest to say, it makes me super uncomfortable to leave it undone. And so I do it for me. not necessarily for my kids. It's just I get really anxious about the thought of whether they'll be okay going into school without the homework there. And I just want to shut it down so I can go on my day, right, and not worry all day. So it's just an important thing to be nice to yourself that you have these concerns. No problem. Just be aware of them so you can make choices about how you want to respond. And for a lot of people, just the common version is being a good parent equals helping, fixing, preventing anxiety, maybe making it never happen or making it go away. And a lot of the treatment we know for adult anxiety and for child anxiety is that we want to have a different relationship to anxiety and not feel like we have to do something or to get rid of it. The power of anxiety goes away if we know that we don't have to fix it. So what we're trying to teach our kids, this is the same thing like we were asking for the predictions parents can do. Did I need to help or fix? What happened when I did not? And how did my child feel about it? Because that's the most important thing often in the parenting domain is what actually happened and how did the child feel about the teacher's reaction to having not done the assignment or to wearing the mismatched socks. The kid could come back and say, oh, like 3 kids thought it was really funny. 2 kids asked me, like, why did I do that? Right. And most didn't notice. Right. Yeah. And how did they feel? Like, oh, I used to worry about that so much and it was no big deal. That's what we want, the kids to experience.
And for the parents that are viewing this webinar, know that as basic and as these concepts are, they're also really hard to implement. And sometimes a couple of sessions to get that parent support, parent training. Sometimes it's hard to imagine time for full-on therapy, and that's not what we're talking about, but maybe someone to help support you as you're helping your child learn to tolerate their anxiety. And so a couple of sessions can go a long way for some one-on-one help with that if it feels too hard to do that on your own.
Yes, and ADAA has a number of webinars in the public education domain about how to coach kids with anxiety, and we're viewing perfectionism often in the context of anxiety. But there's, I think, a lot of good resources for parents to get even some more help on the things we're talking about, on other webinars available, on ADAA and other websites. And we're going to share some books too.
Yeah.
But we'll almost finish, right?
Yeah. I think we're going to skip through college, although if anybody wants to talk about perfectionism in college, feel free to get in touch with Lynn and I. There are some really good books you can read on perfectionism, and there's more coming out these days on kids and teens. The Cognitive Behavioral Treatment of Perfectionism and When Perfect Isn't Good Enough, those are both books for adults, but very, very good books that
late teens that we find,
and
16 to 18
like it. Teens like them too. Mm-hmm. There's a new perfectionism workbook for teens. Mistakes That Make You Quake is for younger children. What to Do When Good Enough Isn't Good Enough, also for younger children.
And the kids really like seeing themselves and recognizing the behaviors in this book.
Yep. And a lot of teenage girls in particular, I don't know why, but I've been using this How to Like Yourself book. There's some great exercises in there, which I've been doing in sessions with kids. But even though it's not specifically a perfectionism book, I think that it's been very helpful with some of the kids, especially the teenage girls. I've been working with young teenage girls. So those are some books on perfectionism and some of our favorite valuable books for parents. I love this How to Raise an Adult book, as I mentioned. Also Ken Ginsberg's book on building resilience, because really this is what this is all about. We're not raising kids just to get A's. We're raising them to go into the world and be able to deal with whatever comes their way. Carol Dweck's book on mindset and how we learn is fabulous. And the new book by Rachel Simmons, Enough as She Is, about perfectionism and girls and the high standards that girls are expected to reach in all domains of their lives is also
this
really
is also
fantastic.
My new favorite, and that has very clear guidelines.
Enough as She Is.
Enough as She Is my current favorite around this topic particularly. But I think what's very helpful is there are really suggestions for parents about what to do, not just the problem, that I think are grounded in research and very good.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. So if you have questions for us, you may send emails. We are happy to be in touch, Lynn and I. And Finally, some information about ADAA, wonderful organization. So to learn more and to support ADAA's work, also they have a great Find a Therapist function. So if you're finding that you've done some of this at home and you're making some progress but need a little more help, ADAA is a great place to find therapists who specialize in anxiety and in perfectionism, someone in your area who can give you some additional help.